Welcome to Cut Daisies and Unicorns. This is a Phil and Steve edition. And so we're going to talk about, as we introed it on Tuesday, we're going to talk about the Fringe. So, Steve, tell us your affinity to the Fringe.
Well, I'm actually pulled into the Fringe on multiple levels. And so if people are wondering where I stand on that whole thing, just know that my ponderings wandered through the Fringe, and I'm like on so many levels. Now, self-declaration of a reality that I've lived through is I saw a counselor, psychologist, I don't know, psychiatrist.
One of those.
One of those two for probably 14 years. His name was Kent. And
is his name still Kent?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I
yeah.
didn't know.
It is
past tense.
No.
Just past tense.
When I knew him then, his name was Kent, unless he became the counselor formerly known as Kent. I'm not sure. But what I did during that time, it was very beneficial. But then now, as I'm watching different TV shows and other things that, maybe, just asking different questions around things, whether it's propaganda put together, at some level, I don't know. So, but fringe psychology, it really interests me. And then you go into the paranormal.
So we'd say fringe psychology. Are you talking about even like phrenology? You remember that they used to study bumps on your head?
Yes.
Yeah, is that the kind of fringe?
That would be the gateway into how drugs could be used in psychology as well.
Okay.
But when you go just a short distance back in our history, what we have to realize is how much we didn't know.
Yeah. We're
in the age of information right now.
Absolutely.
Information's at our fingertips. Information is available through, maybe even podcasts like Cut Daisies and Unicorns.
Right.
And whether it's good information or bad information, the reality is still information.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's the problem that humanity has gotten itself into, because no matter what the topic, it doesn't seem like that the information leads to absolutism. And yet, I think what is holding us together is a longing for people to know what's absolute. It's the healthy part of boundaries. What are boundaries really good for? They create a border that you know that whether someone steps inside it or outside it, it creates a level of comfort that allows for peace, and it allows for a place of being okay with what's going on. So there could be all kinds of chaos going on outside and around you, but if you have your own boundaries set in place of what you will do, what you won't do, what you won't allow others to do to you, these kinds of things, that's where, so even getting to that part, people long for absolutism, which then moves into a place, because of how we are human, it's our culture that we would be able to take absolutism and then want to impose it on others, because if it works for us, certainly, wouldn't that be healthy and good? And so we want to impress that. What are we doing now at that point? We're crossing the boundary into somebody else's life to be able to declare this absolutism is the thing that they should follow, that they should live by. And yet, they're a culmination of some completely different circumstances that take us back to, is it nature or is it nurture?
Mm-hmm.
So throw some LSD on that.
Yeah. So, that gets into, like even beyond the fringe.
Well, so I end up going to the idea of fringe psychology, and let's go back to World War II or World War I. There were so many things that were unknown, and yet what were the governments doing? It was a massive era of colonialism, to establish the countries, to establish what was it all about? It was about power, power and control. Again, a very reoccurring theme in humanity. And so with that, then we move into, they had to experiment. I mean, my mom had a friend, I believe her name was Mary Jane, and that is not a reference to weed.
I was just about to.
But, oh, Mary Jane's Last Dance. Thank you, Tom Petty. But there was a situation, and I'll have to touch base with my mom in our next conversation. But I think it had to do with epilepsy. And I mean, they did electroshock therapy treatment on her. I mean, if you go back to mid 1950s, they were hooking people up and electrocuting them just shy of, I mean, for the sake of, in the science of what was going on, to see what could allow for corrections. Now, you want to jump onto the religious side of that? Okay, right-wingers, don't freak out yet. But, I mean, you go on to that, and somebody who had epilepsy, even in as little as 100 years ago, was thought to be possessed by demons. In this whole part, then you wonder about how these other things, all play a part, and then I have questions about reality. What was really true then? Was that person really possessed by a demon, that they wanted to shock the demon out of the person?
Yeah.
So when we start talking about fringe, me personally, where my mind wants to go is I want to think about rainbows and unicorns. I don't want to get into the darkness of the fringe in with that. But yet, man, fringe just means that, hey, if there's a tapestry of humanity, then what happens when you get out to the edge of it? That when I hear the word fringe, I'm thinking about it's on the fringe of. Now, there are people who like to live in the world of the fringe, and their purpose for that is so that they can be able to experience in a way, or to push the boundaries of what has been socially acceptable and move into the discoveries on what may not be socially acceptable, but is not outside of reality.
So this reminds me, and maybe you know this, but there's a guy, and his name is Tom DeLonge. You've ever heard of Tom DeLonge?
Remind me again.
So Tom DeLonge had a band. He was in a band in the 90s, a band called Blink 182.
Oh.
You familiar?
Okay.
So Blink 182, they were popular, but they weren't they weren't like, I would say, astronomically popular. But a lot of people listened to Blink 182. A lot of people went to their concerts. And then it was kind of, it was probably 10 years ago that Tom said, hey, I'm not going to make any more music with Blink 182. I'm out.
Huh.
And there was this kind of split and divide with the rest of the band. Travis Barker is their drummer.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So he kind of was trying to continue with Blink 182 without. And then there was still some discussion, like, is Tom DeLonge going to come? He's the lead, so we're going to have to find a brand new lead to kind of carry this on. And there was some talks, and then all of a sudden it was like, yeah, Tom's done. And so Blink 182 kind of carried going beyond. But you were talking about the acceptable fringe or the unacceptable fringe. Well, he jumped out of the band, and eventually he came and put out this video and said, the reason why I'm not continuing with Blink is I believe that there are aliens, and we need to be able to do some more education on this whole thing in order to let everybody else know. So people were thinking, like, man, this dude's crazy. Like, he's jumping out of a band. He was making lots of money.
Sure.
Doing records, going on tours and, like significant amounts of money. And he says, you know what? Like, this is more important to be able to talk about the unexplored, the unexplainable, the aliens. And he's like, they're out there and we need to talk more about this. And he wanted then to become a voice. So he started his own organization that was basically working with a whole bunch of people.
To the stars.
And yeah, but he would be a definite one. People are like, "Oh, I know Tom DeLonge. He's from Blink 182," and he's like, and so he started connecting with other government, former government people, trying to get into all this area of the unexplained, and especially keying in on the aliens.
And you know what I find fascinating? Thank you for Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Is that before Blink 182 took off, what we find out is DeLonge had a band called Angels and Airwaves from 2005 to 2008.
Yeah.
We were just talking before we went on camera
Right.
about Angels and Airwaves. Sorry, John, we're going to revisit this thing and freak him out on a few of these things. But don't you find it interesting? He was born in 1975. In 2005, then, where we're at, 25 years plus, so he's 30 years old. He's already been formulating some of this stuff because Blink 182, he ended up bumping out of that. And I think it was 2017 that he started this alien adventure. And actually, Travis Barker joined him in on that adventure.
He did?
Yeah,
yeah. I didn't realize that.
But aliens and airwaves. When I went to Bible college, and they'll probably pay me not to say which college that was at this point in time in life. But anyway, when I went to Bible college, I had a systematic theology professor that speculated, or at least guessed, that angels are all around us, but the only reason why angels couldn't be seen is because they were on a different wavelength. For instance, audience, we don't argue with the reality of how a radio works. Radio there's a transmitter and there's a receiver. The wave we don't see. Mm-hmm. But with the proper transmitter and the proper receiver, what you're able to do is you're able to listen to somebody in a booth, not so much different than where we're set up in the home studio,
right.
And to be able to get that information out there.
So what's the frequency?
Yeah, exactly. And this professor said that the theophanies and different manifestations of heavenly host then were when there was a revealing to humanity. It was the being's ability to transform the frequency upon which it worked for the heavenly home, or the amount of space and time that it took up, into being able to change into a frequency that we're able to perceive. And we can go along with, if we're going to take science, then chemistry, and then there's physics. This is the work that physicists really, really enjoy. Maybe not necessarily in fringe science.
Astrophysicists too.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Dealing with different planes.
And why do we teach our kids Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star? How, I wonder where you are.
Right. Now, it's very interesting stuff, because I think that gets into there. When we're looking at whether that's the blend of spiritual, talking about angels or demons, and then the frequency on which we can see or not see. And and that was the reason for many of the, as you called, fringe psychology early on, because they were saying is all mental illness? Is that a condition of spiritual demons that are at work within a body? I mean, there were many people who were looking at that in a very real way. Today we would say kind of, they were a little bit quacky, but really, I mean, if they're looking at trying to be able to put, and this was a science, trying to be able to match things up and say this over here doesn't make sense, so could there be something else at play that we're not seeing?
Yeah.
And that's the unexplainable.
Well, and go into the science of medical care. All right. Most families have a family doctor, or at least a hospital where, depending on the doctor or the physician's assistant, you go to take care of your physical body. When something isn't working right, got to take care of that. Remember the first time I had a kidney stone episode? I didn't know what was going on, but it sure hurt. I was certainly glad. Did I ever regret going to the emergency room when I had a kidney stone? The answer was no. And so culture would say, well, that's completely acceptable, right?
Right.
Yet, why, when we move into some of these areas that people are wondering about, why do we get all caught off guard and say, no, it can't be that way, it can't be that way? We're like so definitively connected to what we think we believe we know. Well, who was the dude who figured out if you make some incisions in somebody's thigh and work yourself up to a heart, that you can put stents in to allow for blockages? Like, who gets to think about that?
Right.
Yet somebody did. And so, like, there's that part of being out on the edge to be able to discover and going into places of, or are we just going to get all, there's a word I'm looking for I can't find, but, what is what is, and there won't be anything new. There's nothing new under the sun, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, because even when I believe what you're exploring is like the things that were considered fringe that now today are like commonplace.
Take me back to 1972 or 76 in an episode of Star Trek, and these guys talking into a flip phone.
Right.
So now, if I'm going to take an awesome whack job approach, the real question isn't whether flip phones would become a reality. The question is, in time travel, did somebody go back to that time, come up with the idea so that it could be developed? Or did someone who was thinking about what's the far out wackiest thing that I could ever come up with, Gene Roddenberry, and put all of this together in a way? And so did culture then inform people who are like, well, I wonder what that would be like.
Yeah, and even, so when we look at technology right now, the technology that's in use,
Oh, yeah.
how far back did they actually start developing it? And it's the same thing when we should be, to me, we should be much further along technologically than we actually are right now.
Oh, really? That's your stance?
That's my stance, because to me, why were we looked at like Back to the Future, and there were flying cars. Like, okay, so like what's really holding us back from having a flying car?
Control.
Because even right now, when you're looking at self-driving cars,
Yeah, that freaks me out.
it's already, the technology's there. What's holding us back from actually, people are scared.
Yeah.
They're like, well, what's going to happen? Like, well, something happened to somebody in a self-driving car in Arizona. They got hit, or somebody got killed. Like, oh, okay. Is that really going to hold us back from the use of technology? That if every car was self-driving, would we have any problems?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But to me, I think, the use of technology is saying, like, there's people who are already thinking, 20 years in advance. They're already thinking about things that we would be like, that's even beyond me. It's fringe right now.
Well, and I'm not sure. We were talking earlier today as well that in trying to work out all of our technology for us to do what we do here,
Right.
we've been through a lot of tests. We've talked around the block about a lot of things. Nikolai Tesla. I mean, he was considered a fringe scientist concerning electricity.
Oh, yeah.
And yet you can go and you can watch the Tesla files and you can see systematically how this gentleman was ahead of his time. I mean, Einstein said that he was the smartest man on the planet.
Right.
And there are so many things that even in this whole small, short, trying to figure out documentary, but they're taking his plans for being able to distribute electricity through the Earth's magnetism, and like it's actually happening.
Right.
And so all based on what this guy thought of way back in the day when Edison was really committed to, sending electricity over copper wire. And, oh, wait, do we dare speak the name J.P. Morgan? Actually had just bought major interest in copper mines around the world. So what was he motivated by? We got to lay all this cable. They don't want free distribution.
Right.
So,
and that's all. There's always going to be the dynamic of somebody who's going to try to capitalize. I mean, whether or not Tesla or some of these other people were thinking about the invention, saying, I'm going to invent because, like, I'm trying to make money. I think most of the time inventors, like, in that basic level are saying there's something missing and I'd like to put it into place.
Yeah, me personally, I would like to think that there are people who, for the betterment of humanity, do want to invent. And then when you have a series called Shark Tank, and all these inventors are going to pitch with these big dogs who are, billionaires, millionaires, multimillionaire, and this kind of thing. The core of profiteering and capitalism, is magnified in that situation.
Right.
Yeah. I think one of the shows that I'm watching, The Curse of Oak Island, moves into that these two brothers who have been looking for this lost treasure. Do they want to find the gold? Yes. Have they worked it out with Canada? What ends up happening when they do find the gold? I believe so. But as I hear these brothers share and talk, this is something that was in their hearts when they were little boys running through the woods of northern Michigan together, and imagining finding hidden treasure and the search. They love the search. I think that they're addicted to figuring out problems they don't know the answers to. And then they love the story. They love the story and connecting. And based on, current episodes, they're changing how history has been written because they're finding evidence of humanity being on this island as early as 1400. Well, that puts the timeline, and they're talking about cores of influence coming from Spain and Europe had already been to North America in 1400. And so, I don't know, lots of interesting things, but that they're just willing, by asking the questions, by pursuing, where it leads them, they're finding out information.
So there's another, since you mentioned series.
Yeah.
Heather and I just started one last night. It's on Hulu.
Okay.
And it's called something with the Skinwalkers. there's like this territory in Utah, and there's a whole bunch of, like, as they call it, paranormal things that occur in this place. Like, it's like the Skinwalker Ranch or Skinwalker Territory. I don't even know, but we just watched the first one.
The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, full episodes.
There we go. That's it right there. And I think that there's a lot. I mean, they're talking about, and as you, even going back to earlier part of our conversation, radio waves. They're talking about microwaves. Like, there's waves that are happening, even where they're saying on a dangerous level, where there's, whether it's a magnet, like a strong magnet, there's all kinds of stuff that they're saying occurs there. It used to be Indian territory, which is where they get the Skinwalker thing. But it's pretty fascinating as far as the level of fringe that goes on there as well.
Yeah.
In a territory and because they bring in some stuff, because it's, it's also Utah, and there's some people who are also dealing with, kind of like religious or spiritual things on the other side. But there's a lot of scientists who are trying to study this territory as well, with what's the effects of all this energy and things that are happening here. What, is this affecting the way that what we're seeing, what we're thinking, on the reason why, the paranormal is continuing to occur there. So it's pretty fascinating.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, in a short little, again, using Wikipedia as the source of quick information as we're speaking together.
Yeah.
The Skinwalker is actually a Navajo witch with the power to shapeshift or change from human to animal, moving with lightning speed, and to kill with curses.
Yeah.
And so
they say, actually, I think one of the shapes that it take, like, is this wolf. They've seen like these red, like, wolf eyes.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
And also, if you want to look further into it, there are several books that have been written and other things. So Skinwalker, For the Detour. Apparently there was a film in 2002. You're currently watching the series found on Hulu.
Right.
Yep. And actually it looks like that series, there's a Skinwalker's book series that can be picked up on Amazon. And The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch is also on Prime Video as well, for those who want to cross-reference other platforms to be able to look into that.
So you could get any of those.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about the Fringe, I had mentioned a story a while back to you about a guy by the name of John Greenwald Jr.
All right.
And John Greenwald Jr. is one who has, I believe, as we would talk about the Fringe, he's lived on the Fringe. He's been he puts a lot of the FOIA requests in, which is the Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah.
And so he'll submit Freedom of Information Act, I guess, since 1996.
Have you ever had, should we think about filling out one of those forms?
We probably should, just to get the knowledge of what it takes to be able to.
All right, we have a new assignment.
There
now.
we go.
All right,
we're gonna try to find some information that we would want.
Yeah,
and request it.
Yeah, and see if they turn it loose.
Right.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So those Freedom of Information Acts. They a lot of times you have to continue to submit it. And this.
You're saying that the government won't release information just because you ask for it, even though it could
especially after just one ask.
Really?
Yeah.
So they want to see how consistently persistent you are.
And it's the same thing that'll happen even in city government. I've talked to some people who've filed Freedom of Information Act over, just with the city of Chicago, over a number of issues. We can get into that some other time, but But this guy, John, he would submit these Freedom of Information Act talking about paranormal, fringe, and even most likely in the realm of aliens as well.
Uh-huh.
And so for a long time, he's been trying to dig up information and put things out there. So one of the things that was, I think, particularly interesting was back in last year, 2020, there was the stimulus bill, the first one that came out that I think everyone got like $1,400 or something.
Okay.
And it was in that bill that there was a whole bunch, as most bills that come across, they pack it with other things that you don't always know about.
In a past life, I understood that to be called pork.
Pork is right.
All right. So for those of you who are listening in Australia or some other nation around this little blue marble, just know that we would throw that term out there as pork, not really cut or slaughtered hog,
Right.
but something that's added to add more into. Mm-hmm. They know that if they are going to pass it, that there's little obscure fringe-like items that could be thrown into it, and when there's a document that large, it gets lost and stuff happens.
Right. So somehow within that first stimulus, John Greenwald, whether as a lobbyist, he had some connection with somebody who was able to sneak into this stimulus part a information download of by the CIA. So the CIA knows stuff. That's what he was hoping for. The CIA knows stuff about aliens that they're not talking about. And so he apparently got into the pork of this bill, this stimulus thing that many people weren't going to check on because they were like, oh, we're getting money. Cool. Like that's going to be the headline.
Yeah.
And so, but in there was this Freedom of Information saying the CIA needs to, within a 6-month time frame, release the information that they have on aliens.
Whoa.
Right. I didn't know it was in there.
How does somebody get somebody that's on the inside to be able to make that happen?
I have no idea.
Man.
But somehow I think he made enough connections within the community, within the political realm, and had enough interest to be able to say, all right, we'll get this done. So what happens is that in I think that the 6-month time frame was going to be up in like February or March, which is like right around now. But the CIA, being the CIA, they found an opportunity to release the information during a time period when it wasn't going to be much of a news.
Really?
So they had to find an event.
And there was a major event that came along.
In the beginning of January. January 6th.
2021.
2021.
The date of the insurrection.
The date of the insurrection.
Who, the gentleman, QAnon's shaman?
Yeah, that guy.
Sat behind the desk.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I just I heard an article on NPR in regards to the gentleman who took the video footage that was legal video footage because he was there to report.
Yeah.
And so anyway, very fascinating, his perspective of what he saw and what he watched and everything like that. But yeah.
I mean, and you can tell. I mean, we want to, like, it was an event in history. I mean, like, that's going to live in history. So what the CIA knew was that this is going to be a major event and a news story that wasn't going to go away for a while.
Yeah.
So what about now being the time to release the information off to John Greenwald Jr.
Yeah.
as an opportunity to bury it? So what did they do? They sent over a, 2 million pages. 2 million.
Like in a box?
No.
on a file.
They used like old technology. I mean,
Like
we
microfiche?
know that. No, I think it was like almost. I mean, it wasn't like a floppy disk, but it was basically the equivalent of a floppy disk.
Whoa.
And they used individual files, so each page is like almost like its own shot.
Really?
Yeah. So, and then as the CIA does, they also redacted a whole bunch of it.
Sure.
So you got 2 million pages of black marks too.
Wow.
Now they handed it off. They said, "Here I think they put it on a CD-ROM." And so they said, "Here's a CD-ROM, and it's got 2 million individual pages."
Oh my word.
So now, and that's where then saying, "All right, now how long is it going to take to go through 2 million pages?"
Well, I mean, if you have 2,000 people looking,
Mm-hmm.
a lot less time than just one person.
For sure.
But my question is, does John Greenwald Jr. have that many friends that he trusts?
That's a big if.
Yeah.
So what he did, and I think John Greenwald put together a website,
Okay.
and it's called the Black Vault. So the blackvault.com has and so if you go to the blackvault.com, you'll see exposing government secrets one page at a time. And so they have case files, UFOs and the unknown, and then you get to the middle button which says declassified documents, and there's the 2.2 million pages that are online. And then they have another button for message forums because people are going to want to talk.
Whoa.
And they're going to want to share information. So this Black Vault site, then if you kind of click on the declassified, it'll take you into welcome to the Black Vault. We got all this information. They give you some background. And then, I mean, you can spend all kinds of time digging through the information that is presented. But it leads me to this thought and these ideas that, like, how much is known already by somebody that is not known by a majority? And how much is known ultimately, what I'm getting at is how much is known by our government that they don't want people to know? Yeah. And that's fringe for that reason then.
Wow.
It's fringe because there's people who know information that they're not quite releasing to everyone else. And there are these people out here, persistent people like, this John Greenwald Jr. and Tom DeLonge, who are actively working to try to uncover some of the information that is currently unknown by a majority of people.
So help me understand, why would... Oh, it's interesting, too. I'm at Black Vault. Skinwalker Ranch, Ballard, Utah, is actually one of the articles in substantiated case files that we're working on and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I think you've hit a vein. I think you're going through that. My question, though, is what differentiates the differences between people who want to learn more about this and people who are like, it's just a bunch of gobbledygook. Who really cares?
Mm-hmm. So what differentiates the people?
Yeah, like how do you and I find this fascinating, but there's other people who are like, this is just a bunch of nut job stuff, and why are you even wasting your time?
Yeah, and so for me, when I think about it, for the people out there, like I tend to be, and I was, for a long time still just saying, like, give me something more substantial than a blurry image of some, flash of light that goes across the sky. Like,
yeah,
to me, that's still, the science of it is not going to give me much.
Right.
I really love to be able to see the back. So my wife, on the other hand, she loves learning about all of this alien stuff.
So this is a marital influence.
It is a marital influence.
All right.
So she digs into this more and more, and I'm always like, all right, like usually if we get stuck in, like, I don't, what do you want to watch? Well, I already know, there's 2 categories that Heather always wants to watch. If we ever get stuck in and we don't have anything to watch mode.
Yeah.
It's either crime, like murder mysteries. She loves murder. Or it's like if, and if it's not like aliens.
Yeah.
Like
those 2 things.
She's
down.
Unexplained. Yeah, she's always down.
Yeah.
Always want to learn more about it.
Wow.
And I'm always like, all right, fine, whatever. Yeah. And even like we would, the rest of the family, was always like, yeah, Mom loves that alien stuff. And so even for her birthday, she had one that was on Netflix, and I can't even remember the name. I'll try to remember it and then put it in the show notes. But,
okay.
But there's one on Netflix that she absolutely loved, and it included Tom DeLonge in there. But
really,
yeah, and she was like, she could never get all of us to watch it. So for her birthday, she's like, that's what I want as my present
for everybody to watch,
everyone to watch
together,
to watch it together.
Oh wow,
that's how passionate she is. Like, this is a birthday gift for her.
I'm just fascinated that your exposure into this, that like Tom DeLonge is like it's family conversation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even was passing along things on, because he was active on Twitter. I mean, even like after the Blink 182 split, and then he started. I was like, I would send my daughter Caitlin, tell her like, hey, have you seen Tom's post recently?
Really?
Yeah, he's talking about aliens, and he's talking about, like, the dude's off his rocker.
So, bring me a connection into the current. Who's doing SpaceX?
That's Elon Musk.
Who, in the past or currently, was CEO of Tesla?
I believe he still is the CEO. He's just no longer on the board because of that whole. He was talking about stocks and. You can't, yeah. He was blending too much in that. He affects the market.
Yeah.
When he speaks.
Yeah. And so Amy and I have a favorite movie that's inspiring called Hidden Figures, which is the race to space. And pre-computers, there were individuals who are hired by NASA to be computers, human people that would be able to do the mathematics and all of the math to be able to prove trajectories, speed, impact, how to maintain orbit, when to be able to come in, the go, no-go on launch and entry points and all that stuff. So then we watched a documentary along those lines, and it was talking about the heroes. And this was a group of people who were a part of the foundational building blocks of NASA. Mm-hmm. And as all of that came through, I found it fascinating because there were in this. It was not the people who were in the back rooms doing the figures. It was more the gentlemen at the time who were putting together NASA under the decree of President Kennedy, that, hey, in the next decade, we're going to get to the moon kind of thing. And with all of that, I was just amazed that a country, the United States of America, would put so many resources into the accomplishment. And one of the gentlemen said, he's just like, we faced every day with the challenge where we were trying to put our fingers and our hands out there to figure out something that was so beyond us. And then flash forward, they were doing interviews with the people who were in control center, and whether it has to do with there was just a new rover that landed on Mars last week.
Right.
I mean, people, there's so many different space exploration, like, assignments that are out there, and they're tracking in different ways, and the computer technology is so much more advanced that, the room's not full of people who are doing this stuff, but it's more of the displays that are showing how the computers are handling this pre-programmed stuff. But then it just dawned on me, I'm like, that was in, again, we're back to the mid 60s, before all the development of this other stuff had taken place, and what technology wise we've evolved to. But now there's a gentleman in a privatized that's pushing for taking people to space.
Right.
That blows my mind, that he is of such capacity to be able to shoulder that when you're talking about 60 years later, there's an individual who can hire people to make this reality happen.
Right. And to me, it then leads to more questions about colonization in space, which I think really, I mean, when the United States put together the Space Force as another arm of, ultimately like military, they're already looking at colonization, even though they're not saying it. Like, we're talking about space exploration. Sure. You're looking at space colonization.
Yeah.
And what happens when we trash the Earth, and it becomes uninhabitable to be able to live.
Yeah.
That's what you're really looking for. And that's the reason why, Mars exploration, and I mean, that's all, I mean, before was Fringe, talking about living on Mars, living on the moon, yeah, no, we're not, but you're not telling me they're exploring both those territories as an opportunity to one day move there?
So where I'm going to go I'm going to take a fringe move on that statement. Okay. And here's my question. Is really what this is all about has to do with the idea that humanity is so afraid of not living that it's willing to pursue whatever it could inhabit for the sake of the longevity of humanity.
So state that again. Tell me.
So my question is, when we talk about colonization, and we're dealing with colonization in outer space,
yeah,
you're like, there's a part of power and control. So that whoever's there first and can build a colony that can sustain life, they have the upper hand to say, we did this, we're better than you. That's one layer. But another layer is, for the sake that people are saying that there is not climate change, they'd stand, all of that's bad information. That doesn't even make sense. Understand that's your point. Feel free to continue to live and carry on as you would. But then are there people, we're talking about people withholding information, people who can't deal with that they do have information of what's going on. And I would, hashtag Science Mike on this, because I've heard him talk and I can hear the fear in his voice about how closely we are to the end of the world of being sustainable. And which takes us into a whole different, if you want to get fringe and you want to get conspiracy, what was that series that you turned me on? Not Utopia. It was the one with the rabbits and the shots.
Oh, that is Utopia.
Yeah. So and it came out in the middle of the pandemic.
Right.
And it's talking about these people coming up with a plan to inoculate all of humanity. And what they were doing is that they were basically making it so that people couldn't have babies because they wanted to control the population of the earth.
Thin the herd.
Yeah. And so now all of a sudden we get the shot for the COVID virus. And what's the first thing that's thrown out into the market to create a hysteria of fear? This is the government's plan to be able to make sure that we can't have babies. You and I were talking about this the other day. I shall father no more babies. This has already been taken care of by science.
Yep, me too.
And so, I mean, it's just like one of those things. So this is going along. So, but is there information concerning how long or how sustainable the earth is and again, this goes to your question on how slow technology and where we should be. I don't think we're moving at a fast enough pace to be able to colonize any place in space. But is there within the heart of humanity the fear of extinction? Now, that was a long ramble of, hey, can you break this down in a bullet point? Because I rabbit trailed on the whole thing and stuff like that.
Yeah, because that's where I was getting you, trying to understand. I mean, I think people do have a concept, even if you're denying climate change, like you still have a sense that there are things that are not going to be. I mean, there's going to be an end to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when you're looking at whether it's our individual humanity, like our individual selves, we know that there's going to be an end to this body, this piece.
Yeah.
So I think that, yes, I think people do sense that there's, I mean, what that you see it all the time whether it was Y2K, like this is going, to cause an end to our world.
Yeah.
Because it's going to shut computers down. Computers control so much, and so it's going to control, like our electricity, everything is going to get shut, and eventually it's going to lead to our doom, our end. That's just one example. How many others were there throughout history?
Yeah.
That somebody's saying this is going to end us. It was the 2012 thing. Was it Mayans or?
Yeah. And
that was another one.
Now we're inverted.
This is
now we're
be
at
the end.
2021.
Right.
It's same numbers,
Mm-hmm.
just in a different order.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I just wonder if what that is that who is in us or who are we in? And for the sake of wanting to create our own, for lack of a better word, eternal propagation. Why else would we be going to, Mars to try to set up a colony? I mean, and does Hollywood get dibs on that? I mean, like, because entertainment, like the life that we know it. So does that bring us to ask other questions? And here we are spending the whole time on Fringe, and people are like, yeah, we want to deal with topics that matter to everyday life. And I'm like, yeah, I mean,
right.
I don't know if the word is nihilism, but
everything is meaningless. Meaningless. That would be nihilism.
Yes. Which again, maybe a direct quote from Solomon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gets crazier. So here's this other thing. There's a guy, which I think...
Hold it, wait. I don't know if my body physically is ready to get crazier. Oh. You're saying it gets crazier?
Well, there's some depth, and I just
keep going.
I want to float this, and
okay.
We don't have to explore it completely. But you're familiar with Oliver Cromwell?
Cromwell was back in the 40s?
16th century.
Cromwell was...
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
So he was back, and I'm trying to
the answer to Phil's question is no.
17th century, sorry.
All right, 17th century.
But Oliver Cromwell had a brother-in-law named John Wilkins. He was a distinguished scholar and also an Anglican clergyman who was a founding member of the Royal Society, which was the oldest national scientific society. So he was both dealing spiritual as an Anglican clergyman and very deep in science.
Science, okay.
And he believed through some of what, as he put out there, and it wasn't very, I mean, these are the things that probably about him that weren't public. Probably not, I hadn't heard about this, but he believed that there were people already on the moon. He believed that there were winged creatures. So he was even proposing, and this is the crazy part of where we're at right now. We're talking about colonization and even interplanetary. He believed that there would eventually be interplanetary trade that was happening. That these winged creatures that he believed it, he observed through his telescope, and even back in the 17th century was trying to talk about space travel, which in his mind, I don't think he was thinking rockets, but he was thinking there's got to be some vehicle that's going to take us from here to there. And so when he was looking at already in the 17th century, thinking about interplanetary trade.
Wow.
So these, people have been thinking about this for a long time. That's ultimately where summation, conclusion, is that when you're thinking about interplanetary, you're thinking about things that are outside ourselves, like way outside. It's fringe, but like how much closer do we get to some of these things that we thought were kooky and fringe that maybe are a little bit closer to reality than we thought?
There's a part that the thought that's coming through my mind is the Nephilim in Genesis somewhere.
Yeah.
And it moves on to the conversation there about this people that weren't human propagating with human women.
Right.
And then there was even a question in regards to the giants of the offspring of said creatures. Now, again, for those people who are like, where is this coming from? I'm going to tell you it's coming from a place that biblical scholars would call God's Word. And yet here is this topic of a thing that's not easily explained. But we also get into, in the book of Daniel, which is not only in the Christian faith canon of Scripture, but it's also in the Jewish canon of accepted Scriptures, and is also included in the Catholic canon of Scriptures. So if we have three...
Might as well throw in the Islamic too.
Daniel's in the Islamic?
Yeah, so the Islamics, Muslims would have the Old Testament. Actually, they even have the New Testament as part of their ancient scriptures as well.
I didn't realize that.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have 4 different, if we want to call them world religion views. All right? Because evangelicals probably wouldn't adhere to Scripture of probably 50-50 on the Jewish canon. But they would definitely draw a line from the Catholic canon. And now we're also talking about in regards to the Islamic canon of sacred texts. But we have a pinpoint of commonality between all 4. Mm-hmm. Can we at least admit that?
should.
The book of Daniel is apocryphal or apocalyptic.
Right.
So it's super interesting. And I go back to, this was fascinating to me as a 12-year-old, that in regards to apocalyptic thought, Daniel used imagery from his time period to describe. And it's so interesting how that if you flash forward into future, which is actually our history, that these things being described could be tanks, it could be spaceships taken off, it could be lots of different things. So I only bring it up to show our listeners that we're limited by our own perceptions of what our current reality is. And so the idea of talking about Fringe just opens us up to be able to move into a place in our conversation that we could be open to, that there are other things going on that we're not aware of. And that goes to, what information does the government have? It could be information of, how are we using the filter of our present to either put blinders on and to ignore what's taking place around us, and then to ask the question of, what possibilities for a reality that's outside of our known is actually something that could be accomplished. And so I remember we've talked about, I think it was John a little bit, about different bands. I know in the James Bean episode, I talk a little bit about some previous bands that I've fronted and things like that. But it's funny because as we'd go out to play, there'd be different songs and stuff like that, and people are like, "Man, you sound like so and so," or "You sound like so and so." I got a lot of Neil Young. People would come up and request Neil Young songs for me to sing and things like that. "You sound like that," and one of the bass players said to me, he's like, "Steve, you really don't sound like Neil Young." Boop. Gonna burst that bubble. And I'm like, "What? Okay." He's like, "No, it's the closest reference point. People are saying to you, 'This reminds me of,' and they're using a pillar of a moment in time when they've heard something else, and then it smashes together. You really don't sound like Neil Young." But it's the closest thing people have as a reference point.
Right.
I'm coming back to that our current reality of what we're considering, the things that we want to talk about, taking some of this information and people are like, "Whoa." And just think, how many years ago did Heather introduce you to UFOs mattered to her?
It's been a while. I mean, she can comment when she watches the YouTube video how long it's been.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, but then because of that influence, now you start connecting the dots and you're saying, well, there's something that people are talking about. Mm-hmm. So
I think that there is sufficient things that we have opened up. Right?
Yeah, it's
I mean, I'd hate to add any more to the pile.
It's going to make its own.
Yeah.
So when you go to YouTube and you take a look at Cut Daisies and Unicorns, you can subscribe. We would ask you, please subscribe. Actually,
please
take one of the episodes. Take the Origins episode and forward it to a friend. Have them subscribe too. But you're going to be able to get down. We have a section called Interviews, and that's when we bring people on. We have a PS version, which is Phil and Steve edition.
Like what we're doing right now.
Right now. And then we're going to have Fringe. And we're going to start, taking some of these topics. We're going to dive deeper and just get to know more, be better read on it. And hopefully then be able to cross-reference that to interviews. And I was just thinking, how crazy would it be for us to get John Greenwald Jr. on for an interview? I don't know if it could happen. He might be willing to talk to us. He might be so busy going through 2 million pages redacted that he doesn't have time for it either. Right. I mean, so we'll get into that.
Yeah, there's a lot of possibilities. And we'll just open that door because we'll float things out there just like we did with Birds Aren't Real.
Yeah.
We've still tried to be able to connect with them to find a spokesperson. Yeah. So far, hasn't happened yet. But those things are still out there. Yeah. We're floating it.
Yeah. Well, hey, everybody. Thanks so much for listening to us today as we ponder the fringe and we go all the way around in our experience of how we have just put our toe in the water concerning these things. And we will look forward to our next episode. I believe I could give you a little bit of a teaser. It's one of 2 people. That's all I'll say.
Just explore that.
So you can pick one of the 2 people that you think is going to be on the interview. All right. Thanks a lot for joining us. We're glad you're along for the ride, and we hope you have a great day.
Yeah, enjoy time on the fringe.